The conference room was bright enough to hide nothing. When Mark Roberts struck Monica Roberts, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound landed anyway, sharp, final, then disappeared into the silence of investors who chose not to move. No one asked why she had corrected the numbers. No one asked who she was. They watched as if this too was part of the pitch. What they couldn't see, what Mark never bothered to learn, was that the company standing behind him had been quietly funded by the woman he had just humiliated. And every dollar had a record. If you believe silence has consequences, stay with this story. What follows isn't about shouting back. It's about what happens when truth is documented and time is allowed to work. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about quiet strength, accountability, and legal justice matter to you, consider subscribing. Monica Roberts had learned over time how to occupy space without being noticed. It was not something she had practiced deliberately at first. It began as accommodation, standing a step behind Mark when introductions were made, sitting at the far end of tables where decisions were discussed, lowering her voice when numbers entered the room. Eventually, it became habit. And then it became a kind of discipline. In the early days of the startup, when there was no office and no logo, Monica was the one who tracked every expense in a slim gray notebook. Rent, software subscriptions, filing fees. The amounts were small then, but she wrote them down carefully, aligning the columns, as if order itself could keep the company alive. Mark called it being supportive. She never corrected him. Mark Roberts was good at beginnings. He had energy that filled rooms, a way of speaking that made people feel included, even as he positioned himself at the center. When he talked about the company, he used words like vision, grit, sacrifice. He spoke as though the struggle were noble and solitary, as though survival had depended on his will alone. Monica listened. She had met Mark before the company existed, back when his ideas came in bursts and faded just as quickly. What made this one different was not the brilliance of the product, but the timing. She had money, then nothing extravagant, nothing inherited dramatically, just savings built over years of careful work, conservative investments, and a refusal to spend more than she needed. When Mark said he wanted to try again, she did not hesitate. There was no ceremony when she transferred the first amount. No contract, no applause, just a quiet confirmation from the bank and a note she made to herself, initial support. Short term became months. Months became a year. The company grew enough to need employees. Then an office, then lawyers. Each time the pressure tightened, Mark turned to her, not with requests, but with assumptions. The rent would be covered. Payroll would go through. The filing deadline would not be missed. And Monica ensured that it wasn't. She never announced what she was doing. When vendors were paid on time, she let Mark take the credit. When the company survived a missed milestone, she accepted his thanks as though it were sufficient compensation. She did not correct the narrative forming around them that Mark was the risk-taker, the builder, the one who carried everything on his shoulders. She told herself it didn't matter. In public, Monica became Mark's wife. Sometimes operations help. Once memorably, the organized one. She was introduced last, if at all. People assumed she handled calendars, not capital. She allowed it. There was safety in being underestimated, even if she didn't yet know how much. What Monica did know was how to watch. She noticed the way Mark's tone changed when investors entered a room. How his voice sharpened when questions lingered too long on details he hadn't prepared for. She noticed how quickly irritation followed correction, especially when it came from her. The company's numbers were her responsibility in practice, but never in title. When she spoke, it disrupted the performance. So she learned when to stay silent. Investor Day approached with the inevitability of weather. Mark spoke of it constantly, framing it as the moment everything would change. If the funding came through, he said they would finally breathe. If it didn't, he said nothing, but his tension filled the house anyway. Monica prepared quietly. She reviewed spreadsheets late at night, checking figures against her own records. She printed summaries and slipped them into a folder Mark never opened. She sent polite reminders about deadlines, which he skimmed. She made sure the numbers aligned, even when she suspected he would simplify them for effect. On the morning of the meeting, Monica dressed the way she always did for these events, neutral colors, clean lines, nothing that asked for attention. She carried her notebook and a pen she trusted. Mark barely noticed. He was already rehearsing his pitch aloud, pacing as though the room itself were waiting for him. The conference room downtown was all glass and light, designed to impress and to expose. Monica took a seat near the back as usual. Mark stood at the front, confident, animated, entirely at home. As introductions were made, Monica watched the faces around the table. She recognized the subtle signals, the lean forward of interest, the crossed arms of skepticism. She noted who looked at her and who didn't. Most didn't. When Mark began speaking about the company's financial resilience, Monica felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, precision. He was close to the truth, but not quite aligned. A small discrepancy easily corrected, but left unaddressed, it could unravel later. She waited. When the moment came, she spoke calmly. Just one sentence. A clarification. Mark turned toward Thor, at her with an expression she had seen before, surprise edged with anger, as though she had violated an unspoken rule. The room went still, waiting to see how he would respond. What followed would become the moment everyone remembered differently. But before that, there was Monica seated, composed, fully aware of the history that had led them here. She knew what she had given. She knew what had been taken. And she knew even then that silence had limits. She did not yet know how those limits would be tested. Only that whatever happened next would not be undone by apology or explanation. The records existed. The truth was already written down. And time, she knew, had a way of finding them. The money never arrived with ceremony. It never announced itself. It moved quietly, the way Monica preferred everything important to move. At first, the transfers were modest bridges over shallow gaps. A delayed invoice. A software renewal that couldn't wait until the next quarter. Mark framed each one as temporary, a favor that would be returned once momentum caught up. Monica did not correct the language. She had learned that words mattered less than outcomes. What mattered was that payroll cleared. She remembered the first time it almost didn't. The company was still small then, just 6 employees, working out of a borrowed office with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that leaked onto the counter. Mark had come home late, pacing, talking fast. The client had delayed payment. The bank balance sat just below the threshold that mattered. Monica listened, then opened her laptop. She didn't ask how it would be paid back. She didn't negotiate equity or titles. She wired the money before Mark finished explaining the problem. The confirmation arrived seconds later, clean and unemotional. She forwarded it to herself, labeled it carefully, and closed the computer. The next morning, Mark told the team he had worked something out. They applauded him. That pattern repeated itself with minor variations. When the office lease required a deposit sooner than expected, Monica covered it. When the lawyer demanded a retainer to finalize incorporation documents, Monica paid. When a senior hire needed reassurance that the company was stable enough to leave their current job, Monica made sure the numbers supported the promise. Each time, she documented everything. She kept a digital folder mirrored across 2 encrypted drives. Inside were bank statements, wire confirmations, email threads, invoices stamped paid. She didn't organize them out of fear or suspicion. She did it because she believed order was a form of respect for herself and for reality. Mark, meanwhile, began to tell a different story. In meetings, he spoke about personal sacrifice, about maxed-out credit cards and sleepless nights. He described the company as something he had built with nothing but determination. When investors nodded sympathetically, Monica noticed how his posture changed straighter, firmer, as though belief itself were fuel. Occasionally, someone would ask about Monica. "What does your wife do?" an advisor asked once casually. Mark smiled. She helps keep things running. You know logistics. Monica stood nearby, holding her notebook. She did not interrupt. Another time, during a networking event, an investor assumed she was an assistant and handed her an empty glass. Monica took it and placed it on a tray without comment. Mark didn't notice. Or perhaps he did and chose not to. At home, the dynamic shifted subtly. Mark grew less inclined to explain decisions. He talked over Monica more often, especially when she asked about spending. He had begun to see her contributions not as support, but as background noise. Constant, reliable, undeserving of acknowledgement. When she suggested formalizing her investment, Mark waved it off. "It's just us," he said. "Why complicate it?" She let it go, not because she agreed, but because she understood the value of timing. As the company expanded, so did the scale of her involvement. Monica reallocated her own portfolio to ensure liquidity. She delayed personal plans. She declined opportunities that required travel or risk. All of it was invisible to the people who mattered most in the room. The irony did not escape her. Mark spoke often about trust, about loyalty, about how betrayal was the greatest threat to any partnership. He spoke as though these were values he carried alone. Monica watched him practice his pitch in the mirror one evening, adjusting his tie, rehearsing the story of how close he had come to failure and how he had pulled himself back. She recognized which parts were true and which had been simplified for effect. She said nothing. There were moments brief and unguarded when Mark almost acknowledged her. Late at night, after a small win, he would thank her for being there. The phrase was vague enough to mean everything and nothing at once. Monica accepted it with a nod, aware that gratitude, when not attached to understanding, was temporary. What endured were the records. She kept notes not only of transactions, but of conversations, dates, context, who had been present when decisions were made. She didn't frame them as evidence, not yet. To her, they were simply facts, arranged carefully, waiting. As Investor Day approached, the stakes sharpened. The company's burn rate increased. Mark authorized expenses with the confidence of someone who believed funding was inevitable. Monica watched the balances tighten and prepared accordingly. She covered a shortfall without mentioning it. Again, this time, she added a note to her record's critical intervention. She did not tell Mark what it cost her. She did not tell him what she had postponed to make it possible. He was already telling a room full of people that the company had survived because he had refused to quit. In private, his patience with her thinned. When she asked questions, he accused her of doubting him. When she suggested caution, he accused her of fear. He did not strike her then, but the tension had a familiar shape pressure seeking an outlet. Monica recognized it. She had seen it before, just not this close to an audience. On the morning of Investor Day, she reviewed her folder one last time. Everything was current. Everything was accurate. She slipped the folder into her bag and took her seat in the back of the conference room. Mark spoke confidently, citing resilient stability growth. When he mentioned the company's ability to weather setbacks, Monica felt the quiet weight of every transfer she had made. She did not correct him, not yet. But when he presented a projection that understated the role of past cash infusions, Monica felt the line approach. It wasn't about credit. It was about truth. A small misrepresentation left unchecked could become a larger one later. She raised her voice once, calmly, precisely. That was all it took. The room froze, as if a rule had been broken that no one had acknowledged until then. Mark turned toward her, surprise giving way to something harder. Monica met his gaze without apology. She had not interrupted out of impulse. She had not spoken out of pride. She had done it because facts mattered, and because the money that held everything together did not belong to the story Mark was telling. What happened next would be remembered as a single act. But for Monica, it was the culmination of months of quiet decisions, careful records, and a belief that truth, when preserved, eventually demands to be heard. Mark Roberts had learned how to tell a story that sounded like inevitability. By the time the company reached its third year, he no longer spoke about risk as something external. He spoke as though success had always been waiting for him, delayed only by the world's failure to catch up. In meetings, he described obstacles as temporary misunderstandings. In interviews, he framed survival as proof of destiny. People responded to that certainty. Monica noticed how quickly rooms adjusted to Mark's version of events. When he spoke, heads nodded. When he paused, people leaned in. The cadence of his voice suggested control, even when the facts beneath it were fragile. Investors liked that. Advisors respected it. And over time, Mark began to believe his own narration without hesitation. He stopped checking numbers with Monica. It wasn't abrupt. It happened gradually, disguised as efficiency. He skimmed spreadsheets instead of reading them. He brushed past questions with phrases like, "We'll optimize later," or "That's not the narrative we're selling." When Monica flagged inconsistencies, he thanked her politely in front of others, then dismissed the concern in private. "You worry too much," he said once, not unkindly. "That's why this works. I dream. You stabilize." The words were meant as praise. Monica heard the boundary they created. In public settings, Mark's language shifted further. He referred to Monica as support. Not partner, not investor. Support. The term was elastic enough to mean whatever he needed it to mean in the moment. When someone assumed she was involved in finances, Mark redirected smoothly. When someone ignored her entirely, he let it stand. Monica observed the pattern without interrupting it. She watched how Mark's tolerance for correction eroded as his confidence grew. Early on, he had welcomed her attention to detail. It had made him feel protected. Now it felt like a challenge to his authority, especially when others were watching. At a small dinner with potential backers weeks before Investor Day, Monica had corrected a timeline Mark misstated casually. The change was minor, the tone neutral. Mark's smile tightened just enough for her to notice. Afterward, in the car, he was silent for several minutes before speaking. "You embarrassed me," he said finally. Monica waited. I corrected a date. "You undermined me," he replied, "in front of people who need to trust me." She considered the phrasing. Trust to Mark had become something that flowed in one direction. She said nothing. From then on, the rules were unspoken but clear. Monica was expected to listen, not speak, to manage quietly, not correct publicly, to ensure stability without drawing attention to the source of it. Mark did not articulate this expectation explicitly. He didn't need to. His irritation communicated it well enough. As Investor Day approached, the tension between appearance and reality intensified. Mark rehearsed his pitch, obsessively refining the narrative until it was smooth and compelling. He spoke about runway resilience and momentum. He framed past cash flow challenges as strategic choices rather than interventions. Monica followed along in her own documents, aligning his projections with her records. The gap between them was not vast, but it was meaningful. She knew how easily small distortions could compound under scrutiny. She raised the issue once late at night, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. "This projection assumes uninterrupted growth," she said, pointing to a line item. "It doesn't account for the capital injections." Mark waved it away. "We don't need to get into that level of detail. It complicates the story." "It clarifies it," Monica replied. Mark exhaled sharply. "This isn't your arena." The words landed with unexpected weight. Monica closed her laptop without argument. She did not press the point, but she noted the moment, carefully mentally filing it alongside others like it. The pattern was no longer subtle. On the morning of Investor Day, Mark was already in performance mode. He moved through the apartment with clipped efficiency, reviewing slides on his phone, adjusting his jacket. Monica watched him from the doorway, aware of the distance that had formed between them. At the conference rooms, Mark took command immediately. He greeted investors with practiced warmth, joked lightly, positioned himself at the center of the room. Monica took her usual seat near the back, her notebook open, pen resting lightly against the page. As Mark began his presentation, Monica listened with full attention. The numbers were mostly accurate. The story was compelling. The room responded exactly as Mark expected it to. Then came the moment. A question from one of the investors prompted Mark to reference the company's financial resilience. He spoke confidently about navigating past challenges without external dependency. He framed continuity as proof of internal strength. Monica felt the familiar tightening, not fear, not anger, but precision. She glanced at her notes. The discrepancy was small but clear. If left unaddressed, it would suggest a reality that did not exist, one where the company had survived on Mark's strategy alone. She hesitated. This was the line Mark had drawn without naming it. This was the arena he had claimed as his own. Monica understood the cost of crossing it. She also understood the cost of remaining silent. When she spoke, her voice was calm and even. She corrected a single point. No accusation, no elaboration, just a factual clarification. The effect was immediate. Mark stopped mid-sentence. For a fraction of a second, he looked genuinely surprised. Then his expression shifted first to irritation, then to something sharper. The room went still. Investors glanced between them, sensing a rupture in the performance. Mark turned fully toward Monica. The silence stretched. In that moment, Monica saw the calculation unfold behind his eyes. The choice between maintaining control and acknowledging correction, between preserving the story and conceding truth. He chose control. What followed would later be described in different ways. Some would minimize it. Some would misremember the sequence. Some would say it happened too fast to intervene. But Monica experienced it with absolute clarity. She did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not retaliate. She simply absorbed the reality of what Mark had become willing to do, to protect the story he told about himself. As the room held its breath, Monica remained seated, hands steady, eyes forward. She registered the faces around the table the way people avoided looking directly at her, the way no one stood. The performance resumed quickly as if nothing had happened. But something fundamental had shifted. Mark continued speaking, but the certainty in his voice rang hollow to Monica now. The story he told no longer mattered. The truth existed elsewhere, documented, preserved, waiting. And Monica knew with a calm that surprised even her that this was no longer about correcting numbers. It was about what silence allowed. Investor Day was designed to feel controlled. The room itself helped. Floor-to-ceiling glass let in clean daylight, muting shadows and softening edges. The table was long and polished, set with identical notepads and bottles of water placed at precise intervals. Everything suggested order, predictability, professionalism. Monica understood the intention. Appearances mattered here more than explanations. She took her seat near the end of the table, where she could see everyone without being seen too much herself. Mark stood at the front, shoulders squared, voice already warmed by rehearsal. He moved easily as though the space belonged to him. The investors watched with practiced neutrality, pens poised, expressions unreadable. From the outside, it looked like any other pitch. Mark opened with confidence. He spoke about growth curves and customer retention, about lessons learned and systems refined. He described the company as resilient, self-sustaining, position to scale. His language was careful, persuasive. He had learned which phrases reassured and which ones excited. Monica listened closely, tracking his words against her notes. Most of what he said was true, or close enough. The danger was not in outright falsehoods, but in omissions that reshaped reality. When Mark spoke about survival during lean quarters, he framed it as discipline and sacrifice. He did not mention intervention. He did not mention where the money had come from when there was no margin left. She waited. Questions followed, measured and polite. One investor asked about cash flow volatility. Another asked about contingency planning. Mark answered smoothly, referencing internal controls and strategic reserves. He smiled at the right moments. He deflected gently when pressed. Then came the question that narrowed everything. A senior investor leaned forward, slightly, fingers steepled. You mentioned navigating a rough quarter last year without outside dependency, he said. Can you clarify what that looked like? The room still attentive now. Mark nodded. Of course. We tightened spending, renegotiated terms, focused on core revenue. It was challenging, but it proved we could sustain ourselves. Monica felt the familiar precision settle in. She looked down at her notes, the date, the amount. The transfer that had cleared at 11:43 p.m. the night before payroll was due. The email Mark had sent her afterward relieved grateful, already forgetting. She hesitated. She was aware of every person in the room, of the unspoken rule that governed these spaces. Do not disrupt the narrative. Do not expose internal fracture. Do not complicate confidence. She also understood something else. If this misrepresentation stood, it would become part of the official record. Investors would make decisions based on it. Legal exposure would follow, not for her, but for the company she had kept alive. She raised her head. Just to clarify, Monica said, her voice calm, level, audible, but not sharp. That quarter also included a short-term capital infusion. The words landed quietly. Mark stopped. For a moment it looked as though he hadn't processed what she had said. Then his eyes flicked toward her, narrowing slightly. The investors shifted, sensing the deviation. Mark smiled, tight and brief. That's not relevant to the point I'm making, he said. It is, Monica replied evenly, in terms of sustainability. The silence deepened. This was not an argument. Monica did not raise her voice or expand her explanation. She did not accuse. She simply stated a fact that complicated the story Mark was telling. Mark's posture changed. The shift was subtle but unmistakable to anyone watching closely. His shoulders stiffened. His jaw tightened. The controlled ease he had carried into the room gave way to something reactive, something personal. He turned fully toward her. We're not doing this now, he said, his voice low. Monica met his gaze without challenge. I'm not doing anything, she said. I'm clarifying. That was when the line disappeared. The movement was quick. Too quick for intervention. Too quick for anyone to step between them or raise a hand. Mark struck her. It was not theatrical. There was no build-up, no shouted warning. Just a sudden, sharp motion that broke the illusion of control the room had been built to sustain. The sound was small but definitive. Monica did not fall. She did not cry out. Her head turned slightly with the impact, then steadied. She remained seated, hands still on the table, her breathing controlled. The room froze. No one spoke. Investors stared at their notes, at the table, at anything but Monica. A phone half lifted, then lowered again. A pen rolled slightly and was retrieved without comment. Mark's hand dropped to his side. For a second he looked around, as though expecting someone to intervene, to contextualize, to soften what had just happened. No one did. The silence stretched heavy and complicit. Mark cleared his throat. As I was saying, he began turning back to the room. And just like that, the meeting resumed. Slides advanced. Numbers appeared on the screen. Questions were asked and answered. The performance continued, though something in the air had changed. Monica sat through it all. She did not leave. She did not make a scene. She adjusted her posture and returned her attention to her notes, writing carefully, deliberately. She noted the time. She noted who had been present. She noted who had looked away. Her cheek throbbed faintly, a distant sensation compared to the clarity forming in her mind. What had happened was not an outburst. It was a decision, made publicly, witnessed privately. When the meeting concluded, investors gathered their things with forced normalcy. Polite goodbyes were exchanged. Mark shook hands, his smile restored, though strained. No one mentioned the interruption. No one asked Monica if she was all right. As people filed out, Monica remained seated for a moment longer. She closed her notebook slowly, ensuring everything inside it was aligned. Mark leaned toward her, his voice urgent and low. We'll talk about this later, he said. Not here. Monica looked at him, her expression unreadable. She did not respond. She stood, collected her bag, and walked out of the room with measured steps. Heads turned briefly, then looked away. In the hallway, the air felt different. Cooler, less curated. Monica paused near the glass wall, steadying herself, not out of weakness, but out of intention. She took one slow breath, then another. What had just happened would not be undone by explanations or apologies. It had been seen. It had been allowed, and somewhere between the silence that followed and the records she already possessed, Monica understood something with quiet certainty. This was no longer about correction. It was about accountability. The applause at the end of the meeting was polite and restrained, as if everyone sensed it no longer belonged to the moment. Monica stood near the exit while investors gathered their coats and exchanged closing remarks with Mark. The glass walls reflected fragments of movement, hands shaking, smiles resetting into place, the choreography of professionalism resuming as though nothing irreparable had occurred. Monica watched without participating. She felt oddly distant from the scene, as if she were observing it from behind a pane of soundproof glass. Mark did not look at her again until the room was nearly empty. When he did, his expression carried irritation rather than concern. "You shouldn't have said anything," he told her quietly, keeping his voice low enough to avoid attention. "You undermined me." Monica said nothing. "You embarrassed me in front of them," he continued. "Do you have any idea what that looks like?" She met his eyes briefly, then turned away. There was nothing left to explain. Whatever language might once have bridged the distance between them no longer applied. They left the building separately. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace. Cars idling at intersections, pedestrians scrolling on their phones, the ordinary life of an afternoon that would not remember what had happened upstairs. Monica walked a few blocks before stopping, letting the rhythm of her steps slow. The sting on her cheek had dulled into a faint pressure. What lingered more sharply was the awareness of being witnessed without being defended. She did not cry. Instead, she took out her phone and opened a blank note. She typed the time, the location, the names she could remember without hesitation. Then she saved it. At home, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet. Mark had not returned yet. Monica placed her bag on the table and sat down across from it, hands folded. She stayed like that for several minutes, allowing the adrenaline to subside. Then she stood and opened her laptop. She did not replay the scene in her mind. She did not speculate about apologies or consequences. She moved forward with the same discipline she had applied to the company for years, step by step, without drama. The folder was exactly where she had left it. Inside were months of records organized with a care that now felt prescient. She reviewed them calmly, ensuring nothing was missing. The bank statements showed consistent patterns. The emails confirmed timing. The invoices aligned. She added a new subfolder and labeled it simply Meeting Investor Day. Into it, she placed the note she had typed earlier. She added the meeting agenda, the calendar invitation, the list of attendees. Each item was dated, each file name precise. Monica understood that documentation was not retaliation. It was preservation. When Mark came home later that evening, the tension entered the room before he did. He dropped his keys on the counter with more force than necessary and loosened his tie. "You didn't have to make it a thing," he said without looking at her. Monica remained seated. "I didn't," she replied. Mark scoffed. "You know what I mean. That wasn't the place." "Where would have been?" she asked, not accusing, simply curious. He turned towards her sharply. "This isn't about semantics. This is about loyalty." Monica considered the word. Loyalty. She thought of the nights she had stayed up balancing accounts, of the opportunities she had declined, of the quiet decisions she had made to keep his company afloat. "I've been loyal," she said. Mark shook his head. "You don't get it. You made me look weak." There it was. Monica did not respond. She watched as Mark paced, his agitation filling the room. He spoke in fragments about pressure, about expectations, about how investors reacted to uncertainty. At no point did he mention what he had done. Eventually, he stopped talking. The silence that followed was heavy, but different from the one in the conference room. This one did not feel complicit. It felt clarifying. "I'm going to bed," Mark said finally. Monica waited until the door closed behind him before moving. She returned to her laptop and began drafting an email. The language was careful and neutral. She did not describe emotions or motivations. She stated facts: date, location, individuals present, the incident described without adjectives. She requested that all recordings from the meeting room be preserved. She cited standard corporate practice. She copied the company's legal advisor, Karen Liu, whose name she had noted earlier. She sent a copy to herself. When she pressed send, she did not feel relief. She felt alignment. Over the next 2 days, Mark avoided the subject entirely. He spoke to Monica only when necessary, his tone clipped. At work, he acted as though nothing had happened. Meetings continued. Emails flowed. The machinery of the company moved forward, powered by habit and denial. Monica observed quietly. She received a brief response from Karen Liu, acknowledging the request and confirming receipt. No commentary, no judgment, just confirmation. That was enough. Monica scheduled a meeting with her bank and took a personal day from work. She dressed plainly and arrived early, her folder tucked under her arm. The bank officer she met with listened attentively as Monica explained that she needed certified statements and wire confirmations for a series of transactions. "Is this for legal purposes?" the officer asked. "Yes," Monica said. There were no further questions. As documents were prepared, Monica reviewed them carefully, checking each line against her own records. Everything matched. The consistency was reassuring, not because it promised vindication, but because it confirmed reality. On her way home, Monica stopped briefly at a cafe and sat by the window, sipping tea she barely tasted. She watched people pass, each absorbed in their own concerns. The world had not changed. Only her position within it had. That evening, Mark finally acknowledged the email. "Why did you copy Karen?" he asked, his voice tight. "Because it was appropriate," Monica replied. "You're escalating this," he said. "You're making it bigger than it needs to be." Monica looked at him steadily. "I'm documenting it," she said. The distinction mattered. Mark stared at her for a long moment, as if seeing her differently for the first time. Then he turned away, muttering something under his breath. Monica did not follow. She returned to her room and opened her notebook. She wrote down the conversation. The time, the words used. What she was building now was not a case fueled by anger. It was a record built on patience. Each step she took was measured, lawful, and deliberate. The silence that had once protected Mark no longer served him, and Monica understood with quiet certainty that the work she had done in the shadows was about to move into the light, not through confrontation but through process. By the third morning after Investor Day, the company had returned to its usual rhythm. Emails moved briskly through inboxes. Calendars filled. Meetings were scheduled, rescheduled, then confirmed again. On the surface, nothing appeared disrupted. The machinery of progress continued, lubricated by the shared decision not to name what had happened. Monica noticed the change immediately. People were careful around her now. Not kinder, just cautious. Conversations paused when she entered rooms. A junior analyst avoided eye contact. Someone who had once asked her questions about logistics now deferred silently to Mark. It was as if her presence had been reclassified overnight, no longer invisible but inconvenient. Mark, for his part, behaved as though efficiency were the highest virtue. He spoke to Monica only when necessary, always in clipped sentences. At home, he stayed late, citing deadlines and follow-ups that could not wait. When he did speak, it was to discuss tasks, never the meeting. Monica did not ask him to. She focused instead on what she could control. The emails she had sent had not been confrontational. It had not demanded action. It had simply requested preservation. That mattered. In corporate environments, words carried weight when they were restrained. Karen Liu's acknowledgement had been similarly precise, receipt confirmed, no commentary offered. Monica understood what that meant. The clock had started. She spent that day organizing the new documents from the bank. Each statement was labeled. Each wire confirmation matched to an invoice or expense. She cross-referenced dates against her calendar entries, ensuring the sequence was unmistakable. This was not about proving intent. It was about establishing fact. That evening, she drafted another email. This one was addressed only to herself. In it, she described the aftermath of the meeting. Mark's reaction, his words, the timing. She did not speculate on motivation. She recorded behavior. She included no adjectives, only verbs. When she finished, she saved it in the same folder, dated and time-stamped. Monica slept that night without dreams. The next day, she met with an attorney. Rachel Stein's office was understated neutral walls, clean lines, nothing designed to intimidate or impress. The waiting room was quiet, the kind of quiet that suggested confidentiality rather than emptiness. Monica arrived early and reviewed her notes while she waited, aligning them one last time. Rachel greeted her with a firm handshake and a calm expression. She did not ask how Monica was feeling. She asked what had happened. Monica told her. She spoke evenly without interruption, recounting the events in sequence. She did not editorialize. She did not raise her voice. She provided documents when Rachel asked for them, answering questions precisely. Rachel listened without reaction, occasionally making notes. When Monica finished, Rachel leaned back slightly. "You did the right thing by documenting immediately," she said, "and by keeping your language factual." Monica nodded. Rachel reviewed the bank records next, her attention sharpening as she moved through the statements. "These aren't casual contributions," she said. "These are structured, consistent capital infusions." "I never formalize them," Monica replied. "That doesn't erase them," Rachel said, "especially if there's a pattern and corroboration." They discussed options. Rachel explained procedure, not outcomes. She outlined what preservation meant, how discovery worked, what could be requested, and what could not. She spoke about corporate governance, fiduciary duties, and the implications of violence in a professional setting. "This isn't about punishing him," Rachel said. "It's about protecting you and correcting the record." Monica appreciated the distinction. They ended the meeting with a plan. No filings yet, no accusations, just preparation. Rachel would draft a formal preservation notice to the company and advise on next steps once responses were received. Monica left the office feeling grounded. Back at work, Mark had called an impromptu meeting. Monica took her seat quietly, notebook open. He spoke about momentum, about moving forward, about not getting distracted by noise. His eyes did not meet hers. During the meeting, a question arose about cash reserves. Mark answered confidently using language he had practiced. Monica wrote down his words without comment. Afterward, she received a message from a colleague she barely knew. It was brief, careful. "I hope you're okay," it read. Monica replied simply, "Thank you." She did not elaborate. That night, Mark confronted her again. "Rachel Stein," he asked, holding his phone. "Why is she asking for documents?" Monica looked at him calmly. "Because I requested preservation." "You're involving lawyers now," he said, incredulous, "over a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Monica replied. "And you involved them when you made it a corporate issue." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "This is going to hurt the company." Monica met his gaze. What happened already did. The silence that followed was different from the others they had shared. It was not heavy with accusation. It was heavy with realization. Mark's voice softened slightly. "We can handle this privately." Monica shook her head. It already happened publicly. He looked away. Over the next few days, responses came in. Karen Liu confirmed that all relevant data had been preserved. The company's IT department acknowledged the request without commentary. The meeting room vendor confirmed retention policies. Each response was logged. Monica continued to work as she always had, quietly, efficiently. She did not avoid Mark, nor did she seek him out. She attended meetings, contributed when appropriate, and documented everything. What changed was her posture. She no longer deferred instinctively. When she spoke, it was measured and necessary. When she was ignored, she noted it. When decisions were made without her input, she recorded the context. This was not defiance. It was clarity. Mark, meanwhile, grew increasingly restless. He checked his phone often. He asked questions he hadn't asked before. He requested summaries from departments he had once trusted implicitly. The silence that had protected him was beginning to thin. Monica understood that the most difficult part was still ahead. Not the confrontation, but the waiting. The restraint required to let process unfold without forcing it forward. She was prepared for that. She had learned patience long before Investor Day. She had learned it while balancing accounts in the quiet hours, while listening without speaking, while funding a future that never acknowledged her. Now that same patience would carry her through the unraveling. The work was no longer invisible. It was just beginning. The bank lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and disinfectant, the kind of neutral space designed to suggest trust without intimacy. Monica arrived 10 minutes early, as she always did, and took a seat near the window where the light fell evenly across the marble floor. She set her folder on her lap and waited. When her name was called, she followed the officer into a glass-walled office that felt more like a conference room than a place where money changed hands. The officer introduced himself, reviewed her identification, and asked how he could help. "I need certified records," Monica said, "for a series of transactions." He nodded unfazed. "Time frame." She gave him the dates, months of them. He typed quietly, the keyboard clicks steady and impersonal. As the screen populated with entries, Monica watched the numbers appear in orderly rows, each one a quiet confirmation of decisions she had made. Without audience or acknowledgement. "These are personal accounts," the officer said, scanning the list. "And some transfers to a corporate entity." "Yes," Monica replied. "Are you looking for summaries or full statements?" "Full," she said, "with confirmations." He nodded again and began the process. There were forms to sign, authorizations to verify. Monica moved through them efficiently, her handwriting precise. She had done this kind of work before, assembling information not to persuade, but to preserve. As the printer hummed, the officer glanced at the documents and paused briefly. "These are substantial," he said, not as a question. Monica met his eyes. They were necessary. He did not ask what for. When the packet was complete, he stamped each page with the bank's seal and slid it across the table. "If you need additional certification or testimony regarding authenticity, we can provide that upon request." "Thank you," Monica said. She placed the documents in her folder and stood. The exchange had been entirely professional, devoid of curiosity or judgment. It was exactly what she needed. Outside, the air felt sharper. Monica walked a few blocks before stopping at a quiet park bench. She opened the folder and reviewed the pages once more, aligning them with her mental timeline. Each transaction told a story not of generosity, but of responsibility. Of moments when failure had been imminent and intervention had been required. She took out her phone and sent a brief message to Rachel Stein, bank records obtained. "Certified. I'll upload copies." The reply came quickly. "Received. We'll index them." Back at the office, Mark was in a closed-door meeting. Monica passed his office without looking in and went to her desk. She scanned her inbox, noting a calendar invite she had not been included on. She wrote down the time and subject line, then returned to her work. The bank records changed the temperature of the situation even before they were formally introduced. Rachel explained it to her later that evening over a video call. "People can argue about intent," Rachel said. "They can argue about tone, context, even memory. But money is stubborn. It doesn't forget." Monica understood. Rachel walked her through how the records would be used, not dramatically, not all at once. They would establish pattern. They would show reliance. They would contradict the narrative Mark had presented to investors about independence and internal resilience. "This isn't about proving he lied," Rachel said. "It's about correcting the representation. And that has consequences." Monica nodded. In the days that followed, Mark's behavior shifted again. He became overly attentive to details he had once dismissed. He asked accounting for breakdowns. He questioned expenses that had long been routine. The confidence he projected publicly remained intact, but privately something had changed. He knocked on Monica's door one evening, unannounced. "I've been thinking," he said, standing in the doorway. "We should formalize your contributions." Monica looked at him steadily. "We can discuss that with counsel," she said. Mark frowned. "Do we need to involve lawyers for everything now?" "For clarity," Monica replied, "yes." He exhaled sharply, then forced a smile. "I'm just trying to fix this." Monica did not respond. She had learned that urgency often masqueraded as repair. At work, investors began asking more pointed questions. Nothing accusatory, just careful requests for documentation. Mark forwarded some of them to Monica with brief notes. "Can you pull this? Do you have records for that quarter?" She complied, sending what was requested, copying Rachel where appropriate. Each exchange was polite, professional, and meticulously documented. One afternoon, Daniel Whitmore requested a follow-up meeting with Mark and the legal advisor. Monica was not included in the invite. She noted it. Later that day, Karen Liu stopped by Monica's desk. "I wanted you to know," she said quietly, "that we're reviewing historical financial disclosures." "Of course," Monica replied. Karen hesitated, then added, "If you have anything relevant that hasn't been shared yet, now would be the time." Monica met her gaze. "Everything relevant is already preserved." Karen nodded, understanding more than she said. That evening, Monica uploaded the certified bank records to the secure folder Rachel had provided. She labeled each file, clearly adding brief descriptions and cross-references. She included a summary document outlining dates and amounts, nothing interpretive, just structure. When she finished, she sat back and closed her laptop. For the first time since Investor Day, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had done. Not the confrontation, not the slap, but the quiet accumulation of choices that had led here. She had not sought power. She had not demanded recognition. She had simply acted responsibly again and again, until responsibility itself became undeniable. Mark came home late that night, quieter than usual. He did not mention work. He did not mention lawyers. He poured himself a drink and stood at the counter, staring into the glass. "You always had this," he said, finally not looking at her. "Didn't you?" Monica considered the question. "I had records," she said. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "You never told me you were keeping them." "I never hid them," she replied. The distinction hung between them. Mark finished his drink and set the glass down. "I didn't think it would come to this." Monica met his eyes. "Neither did I." She went to bed shortly after leaving him in the kitchen. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep and unbroken. The bank records were no longer just numbers on paper. They were anchors holding the truth in place, while everything else shifted. They did not accuse. They did not demand. They simply existed, immutable and clear. Monica understood that from this point forward, the story would move according to procedure, not emotion. Emails would be sent. Meetings would be held. Decisions would be made by people who valued consistency over charisma. She was ready for that. The quiet work she had done in the margins had reached the center of the page, and there was no erasing it now. The company's documents had always existed in plain sight. They were stored in shared drives, referenced in meetings, summarized in slide decks. No one treated them as secrets. And yet very few people had ever read them closely. Mark relied on that. He trusted momentum more than paper story, more than structure. Monica knew better. She accessed the corporate files late one evening after the office had gone quiet. Not to snoop, she had authorized access, but to review them with the same care she had once given to receipts and bank statements. The cap table was there as expected. So were the operating agreement board minutes and notes related to early funding rounds. What she found was not chaos. It was something more subtle: inconsistency. The cap table reflected ownership percentages that assumed contributions had come from Mark alone. The notes described early funding as founder-sourced. a phrase vague enough to pass without challenge, unless someone asked where the money had actually originated. The convertible note documents referenced cash infusions without naming the individual source, relying instead on a generic category internal funding. Monica cross-referenced dates. Each internal infusion aligned perfectly with a transfer from her personal account. She took screenshots, then downloaded full copies. She did not alter anything. She did not annotate. She simply preserved. The next morning, she met Rachel Stein again, this time virtually. Rachel reviewed the documents carefully, her expression focused. "This is where narrative meets liability," Rachel said. "These documents don't reflect the full picture. That's a problem." "For who?" Monica asked. "For anyone who relied on them," Rachel replied. "Investors, advisors, potentially regulators." Monica absorbed that quietly. Rachel continued. "Your contributions functioned as debt or equity depending on interpretation. Either way, they should have been disclosed accurately. The fact that they weren't doesn't disappear because it was convenient." "What happens now?" Monica asked. "We proceed carefully," Rachel said. "No accusations, just corrections." That word again, corrections. Rachel drafted a memorandum outlining the discrepancies between financial reality and corporate documentation. It was technical, restrained, and meticulously sourced. Each claim was supported by a reference, each reference linked to a preserved document. Monica reviewed the draft and approved it without changes. Later that day, Mark called her into his office. He looked tired. The confidence that once filled the space around him had thinned, replaced by something more brittle. He gestured for her to sit. "They're asking questions," he said, skipping pleasantries. Monica nodded. "That was expected." "You gave them the bank records," he said, not accusing, but not neutral either. "Yes. And now they want to revisit the cap table," he continued. "They're saying things don't line up." Monica folded her hands. "They don't." Mark exhaled slowly. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" She looked at him steadily. "I did. You told me it wasn't my arena." The silence stretched. I didn't think Mark began, then stopped. He shook his head slightly. "I didn't think it mattered how the money came in. It was all for the company." "It matters," Monica said, "when people make decisions based on it." Mark leaned back in his chair. "They're talking about revising terms, about disclosures. This could spook investors." "It could," Monica agreed. "So what do you want?" he asked, his voice edged with frustration. Monica considered the question. "Accuracy," she said, "and accountability." Mark looked at her as if weighing something. "You're doing this on purpose," he said finally. "No," Monica replied. "I'm responding to what already exists." That afternoon, an email arrived from Daniel Whitmore requesting a comprehensive review of early funding sources. The tone was professional but firm. He CC'd Karen Liu and another advisor Monica didn't recognize. Rachel responded on Monica's behalf, attaching the memorandum and relevant documents. The email was brief. No commentary, just information. Within hours, replies began to come in. Some were acknowledgments, some were requests for clarification. None were dismissive. The process had begun. Over the next few days, meetings were scheduled, formal ones this time. Counsel present, minutes recorded. Monica attended when appropriate, always prepared, always composed. She spoke only when asked, answering questions precisely. Mark attended too, his demeanor controlled but strained. He avoided looking at Monica during these sessions, focusing instead on the advisors and investors across the table. During one meeting, a board member asked directly, "Why weren't these contributions reflected accurately?" Mark hesitated. He spoke about oversight, about informal arrangements, about trust. The answer satisfied no one. Monica watched as the room shifted subtly, not against Mark personally, but away from the narrative he had relied on. Investors asked about governance, about internal controls, about how decisions were made. The company's paper-skin thin, flexible, dependent on consensus, began to show stress. After one particularly long meeting, Mark confronted Monica in the hallway. You could have come to me first, he said, his voice low. I did, Monica replied. You could have handled this privately, he insisted. I tried, she said. Mark looked away, jaw tight. You're dismantling everything. Monica shook her head. I'm revealing what was already there. That distinction mattered to her, even if it didn't to him. At home, the atmosphere grew colder. Conversations were brief, functional. Mark slept on the couch some nights, citing late work. Monica didn't comment. She used the quiet to organize, to prepare to rest when she could. One evening, she reviewed the board minutes from an early meeting she had attended, but not spoken at. The language struck her now as revealing. Decisions attributed to Mark had been influenced by data she had provided. Risks minimized because of capital she had supplied. She forwarded the document to Rachel with a note context. Rachel replied, "This helps." The following week, the board requested a revised cap table reflecting accurate funding sources. They also requested an independent review of governance practices. Mark's authority began to erode, not through confrontation, but through procedure. He tried to regain control by offering explanations, by reframing events. But each attempt was met with requests for documentation. And documentation favored Monica. One afternoon, Karen Liu approached Monica quietly after a meeting. You handled this well, she said. Monica inclined her head slightly. I handled it carefully. Karen nodded. There's a difference. As the days passed, Monica felt neither triumph nor vindication. What she felt was clarity. The fog that had surrounded her role for years was lifting, not because she demanded recognition, but because the truth could no longer be avoided. Mark's story had depended on omission. Monica's depended on record. In the end, it was the records that spoke. They did not accuse him of malice. They did not dramatize the past. They simply aligned events with evidence, leaving no room for interpretation that favored convenience over accuracy. Monica understood that this phase, paperwork, meetings, revisions, was not the climax. It was the foundation, the necessary work that allowed consequences to be lawful rather than emotional. The company was changing shape not through spectacle, but through exposure. And Mark, for the first time, was being forced to confront a version of the company that did not center him. Rachel Stein did not raise her voice when she spoke. She didn't need to. Her office was quiet in the way that suggested precision rather than comfort. The desk was clear, except for a single legal pad, a pen aligned parallel to its edge, and Monica's documents arranged in careful stacks. Rachel had already reviewed them once. Now she reviewed them again, slower this time, as though confirming what she already knew. This is the moment where people usually expect something dramatic, Rachel said, looking up. A confrontation, a public statement, a demand. Monica remained still. That's not what happens. Rachel allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. No, what happens is procedure. She tapped the top page. We start with what's admissible, not what's upsetting, not what feels fair, what can stand. They went through the materials one by one. The bank records came first. Rachel explained how certified statements functioned as objective evidence. These established dependency, she said, not emotion, reliance. That matters. Next came the emails, the preservation request, Karen Liu's acknowledgement, the follow-up correspondence. Rachel pointed out the restraint in Monica's language. You didn't accuse, you didn't escalate. You asked for standard protocol. That protects you. Monica nodded. She had chosen every word carefully, though at the time it had felt instinctive rather than strategic. Then came the incident. Rachel did not dwell on it. She did not ask Monica to describe how it felt. She asked when it happened, who was present, and what documentation existed. Monica answered succinctly. The existence of witnesses matters, Rachel said. So does the environment. This wasn't a private dispute. It was a professional setting. She explained how indirect recordings, hallway cameras, time-stamped meeting logs, vendor retention policies could corroborate the event without relying on a single angle. We don't need spectacle, she said. We need consistency. Monica listened, absorbing the logic. It was not comforting, but it was stabilizing. Rachel then outlined the next steps. There are multiple tracks, she said. Corporate governance, financial correction, personal protection. Protection, Monica asked. Rachel met her gaze. You were struck in a professional setting. That changes the calculus. They discussed options without commitment. A formal complaint, a civil claim, governance actions that could limit Mark's authority pending review. Rachel emphasized that nothing needed to be rushed. Speed favors mistakes, she said. Accuracy favors outcomes. When the meeting ended, Monica felt neither empowered nor diminished. She felt oriented. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Monica walked several blocks before returning home, letting the explanation settle into her bones. This was not about winning. It was about alignment between truth and record, between action and consequence. That night, Mark called her from the living room. Rachel Stein called me, he said. Monica paused in the doorway. She contacted counsel, she replied. Not you. Mark laughed, sharp and humorless. This is turning into a legal circus. It doesn't have to, Monica said. If you cooperate. He looked at her as though the suggestion were absurd. Cooperate with what with accuracy, she said. Mark shook his head. You're acting like I committed a crime. You acted, Monica replied. The rest is process. He stared at her, searching for something, anger perhaps, or fear. He found neither. What unsettled him most was her calm. The next morning, an email arrived from Rachel with a subject line, preservation and next steps. It was addressed to the company's counsel and the board. Monica was copied. The language was formal, neutral, and precise. It requested confirmation of preserved materials and outlined the scope of review. Within hours, confirmations arrived. Mark forwarded one of them to Monica with a single line. This is getting serious. She replied, it already was. As days passed, Rachel's role expanded. She requested additional documentation. She coordinated with outside counsel. She began preparing for the possibility of formal proceedings without committing to them. One afternoon, she called Monica with an update. There's a recording, Rachel said. Monica's breath caught just slightly. Of what not of the strike directly, Rachel clarified, but of the room immediately before and after. Audio is partial, enough to establish disruption and reaction. Is it usable, Monica asked. Yes, Rachel said, because it aligns with everything else. Monica closed her eyes briefly, not in relief, in recognition. Mark found out the same day. He arrived home early, his movements sharp, restless. There's a recording, he said, not asking. Monica nodded. I know. You planned this, he said, his voice rising. No, she replied. I prepared for reality. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. You're destroying me. Monica watched him quietly. You're experiencing consequence. The difference mattered. That evening, Rachel sent a summary memo outlining the evidentiary posture. Monica read it carefully. The language was unemotional, almost spare. It described facts, corroboration, and legal implications without judgment. This is strong, Rachel wrote, because it's clean. Clean. That word stayed with Monica. The strength of the case was not in outrage or rhetoric. It was in alignment. Every piece pointed in the same direction. No contradictions, no embellishments. Mark's attempts to reframe began to falter. In meetings, he spoke less. When he did, advisors interrupted with questions. Requests for documentation replaced deference. His authority, once assumed, now required verification. Monica continued to do her work. She attended meetings. She answered questions. She documented interactions. She did not celebrate. One afternoon, Daniel Whitmore requested a private conversation with Monica. Rachel was present. I want to be clear, Daniel said. This isn't about sides. It's about risk. Monica nodded. I understand. What happened was unacceptable, he continued. And the financial misrepresentation complicates things further. Monica did not respond. Daniel looked at Rachel. What do you recommend? Rachel spoke calmly. Correct the record. Stabilize governance. Remove points of exposure? Mark was not named. He didn't need to be. As the meeting ended, Monica felt a familiar stillness settle over her. Not numbness, focus. She had not raised her voice. She had not demanded punishment. She had allowed facts to accumulate until they spoke louder than any argument could. The lawyer, who spoke in procedure, not emotion, had given her exactly what she needed. A path forward that did not require her to become someone she was not. Procedure did not move quickly. It moved deliberately. That was the first thing Monica learned, as the days settled into a rhythm of requests, confirmations, and quiet recalibrations. There were no dramatic announcements, no sudden reversals. Instead, there were emails with careful subject lines, meetings with clear agendas, and decisions that arrived without flourish. Rachel Stein called it the long middle. "This is where most people lose patience," she said during one of their calls. "They want the moment where everything breaks open. But this is where outcomes are decided." Monica understood. She had lived in long middles before. At work, the atmosphere had shifted again. Not with hostility, but with caution. Conversations were shorter. Meetings ended precisely on time. Mark spoke less, listened more. When he did speak, his words were measured, stripped of the flourish that once defined him. The company's advisors were now deeply involved. Governance reviews were underway. Financial disclosures were being reconciled. No one said the word investigation, but everyone acted as though one existed. Monica attended meetings with Rachel present. She answered questions when asked, never volunteering more than necessary. Her role was no longer ambiguous. She was not introduced as support or logistics. She was introduced as a stakeholder. Mark noticed. During one meeting, a consultant asked Monica directly about early funding assumptions. Mark started to answer, then stopped himself. He looked at her, waiting. Monica responded calmly, outlining the sequence of contributions and the conditions under which they had been made. She referenced dates, amounts, and documentation. She did not look at Mark while she spoke. When she finished, the consultant nodded and moved on. The power shift was subtle but unmistakable. After the meeting, Mark approached her in the hallway. "You didn't have to make it sound like that," he said quietly. "Sound like what?" Monica asked. "Like I didn't know what I was doing." Monica met his eyes. "I described what happened." He looked away. Rachel advised restraint. "Let them ask," she said. "Answer what's asked. Nothing more." That restraint extended to personal matters as well. Monica did not discuss the slap with colleagues. She did not share details with friends beyond what was necessary. She did not seek validation. She trusted the process she had set in motion. One afternoon, Rachel called with an update. "The board is considering interim governance changes," she said. "They're concerned about exposure." "What kind of changes?" Monica asked. "Limiting unilateral decision-making," Rachel replied. "Requiring dual authorization for certain actions." Monica absorbed that quietly. "And Mark?" she asked. "There's discussion," Rachel said carefully, "about his role." That night, Mark came home later than usual. He moved through the apartment without speaking, his movements heavy. Monica watched him from the kitchen, noting the tension in his shoulders. "They're talking about sidelining me," he said finally. Monica didn't respond. "You could stop this," he continued. "You could tell them it was a misunderstanding." Monica set her glass down gently. "It wasn't." Mark's voice rose. "You know I didn't mean, this isn't about intent," Monica said. "It's about what happened." He stared at her, incredulous. "You're choosing them over me." Monica considered the framing. "I'm choosing accuracy," she said, "and safety." The word landed harder than she expected. Mark fell silent. The following week, the board announced interim measures. Mark would retain his title, but would no longer act unilaterally. Major decisions required oversight. Public-facing roles would be shared. The announcement was internal, professional, devoid of commentary. Mark took it badly. He oscillated between defensiveness and resignation, between attempts to regain control and moments of quiet withdrawal. He spoke often about betrayal, about loyalty, misplaced. Monica listened without engaging. She knew this phase was dangerous not because of confrontation, but because of volatility. People who feel their power slipping often act unpredictably. Rachel agreed. "Keep documenting," she said, "especially interactions." Monica did. She noted conversations, tone, timing. She saved emails. She took screenshots, not obsessively but consistently. The same discipline she had applied to finances now applied to behavior. One evening, as Monica reviewed her notes, she realized something that surprised her. She was no longer afraid. The fear that had once kept her quiet, the fear of destabilizing the company, of being blamed, of losing what she had helped build, had dissolved. In its place was a steady resolve. Not anger, not vindication, just clarity. The company was no longer hers to protect at any cost. It was a system accountable to reality. Rachel called again near the end of the week. "We've been offered a settlement framework," she said. Monica listened. "It addresses financial correction and governance," Rachel continued. "It doesn't address the incident directly." Monica understood what that meant. "They want to contain it." "Yes," Rachel said. "They want closure without precedent." Monica was silent for a moment. "And your recommendation?" Rachel paused. "I recommend we push for acknowledgement. Not public, but formal." "Why?" Monica asked. "Because silence is what allowed this," Rachel replied. Monica nodded slowly. They drafted a response requesting specific terms, corrected disclosures, restitution, aligned Desaretta mind with her contributions, governance changes made permanent, and a formal acknowledgement of the incident within company records. No apology language, no admissions of guilt, just acknowledgement. When Mark received the proposal, he was livid. "They're forcing me to admit something," he said, pacing the living room. "This will follow me." "It already has," Monica replied. "You're doing this to punish me," he said. Monica looked at him steadily. "I'm doing this so it doesn't happen again." The distinction mattered to her, even if it didn't to him. Days passed without resolution. Negotiations continued. Language was refined. Terms adjusted. Throughout it all, Monica remained composed. She did not attend every meeting. She did not insist on being heard. She trusted Rachel to carry the legal weight. When the final proposal arrived, it was quieter than she expected. It outlined a transition. Mark would step back from leadership over a defined period. Governance changes would remain. Financial corrections would be made. The incident would be acknowledged internally. No public statement. No spectacle. Rachel reviewed it with Monica carefully. "This is solid," she said. "It protects you." Monica read it twice. She considered not what it offered, but what it required. "Does this prevent retaliation?" she asked. Rachel nodded. "There are provisions." Monica closed the document. "Then accept." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" Monica nodded. "I don't need more." When Mark learned of the acceptance, his reaction was muted. He seemed tired more than angry. The fight had drained out of him, leaving something hollow behind. "This is how it ends?" he asked her quietly. Monica considered the question. "This is how it changes," she said. The long middle was drawing to a close, not with a bang, but with a recalibration, a quiet realignment of power and responsibility. Monica understood now that justice did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived through procedure, through records kept, and through restraint maintained, when reaction would have been easier. She had chosen that path long before Investor Day. Now it was choosing her. The first investor to speak openly did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Daniel Whitmore waited until the room had settled into its post-meeting quiet, papers, stacked chairs pushed in the soft hum of the projector cooling down before he addressed the group. His tone was measured, almost apologetic, as though he were acknowledging something that should have been said earlier. "I want to talk about what we saw," he said. No one interrupted him. Monica sat near the end of the table, her posture relaxed, her hands folded over her notebook. Rachel was beside her, still attentive. Mark sat across the room, his gaze fixed on the tabletop. Daniel continued, "Not just the numbers, not just the disclosures. I mean, the moment that everyone noticed and no one addressed." The air tightened. "This isn't about blame," Daniel said. "It's about risk. and culture. One of the advisors cleared his throat as if to redirect the conversation back to spreadsheets and timelines. Daniel raised a hand gently. "I'm not finished." He looked around the table. When something happens in a room like that and we all choose silence, we're making a decision. We're saying what we'll tolerate. Monica felt the subtle shift then, not toward outrage, but toward honesty. Daniel turned slightly toward her. "Miss Roberts handled herself with restraint," he said. "That matters." Mark looked up sharply, then away. Daniel went on. "The financial discrepancies matter, the governance gaps matter, but the incident matters too, because it tells us something about how power is exercised when no one pushes back." No one argued. The advisor, who had cleared his throat earlier, nodded slowly. "We should have addressed it," another investor added. "At the very least, we should have paused the meeting." Monica listened without reacting. She did not seek acknowledgement. She let the moment exist without claiming it. Daniel concluded, "If we're serious about mitigating risk, we can't treat behavior as separate from structure. They reinforce each other." The meeting ended shortly after, with action items assigned and timelines confirmed. As people filed out, several paused briefly near Monica, not to apologize, but to acknowledge her presence in a way they hadn't before. A nod. A quiet "thank you." Nothing performative. It was enough. In the hallway, Mark approached Daniel, his voice low and tense. Monica didn't hear what was said, but she saw the exchange end without resolution. Mark walked away, his shoulders rigid. Rachel leaned toward Monica. "That was significant," she said quietly. Monica nodded. "He said what others were thinking." "Yes," Rachel replied, "and now it's on record." That afternoon, the requests began to come in more formally. Investors asked for revised projections that incorporated accurate funding sources. Advisors requested updated risk assessments. The board scheduled a session specifically to address culture and conduct, framed carefully as part of governance review. Nothing was framed as punishment. Everything was framed as necessity. Monica continued to respond with the same calm precision she had practiced for years. She provided documents when requested. She answered questions directly. She did not speculate about motives or outcomes. Mark, by contrast, struggled with the shift. He attempted to regain footing by offering explanations about stress, about pressure, about misunderstanding. Some listened politely. Others redirected him back to documentation. The difference was no longer subtle. One evening, Mark confronted Monica again, his voice edged with desperation rather than anger. "They're rewriting everything he said. They're acting like I'm a liability." Monica looked at him steadily. "They're acting like they're responsible." For what he demanded. "For what they fund," she replied. Mark shook his head. "You let this happen." Monica considered the accusation. "I allowed truth to exist," she said. "That's not the same thing." He laughed bitterly. "You always hide behind words." She did not respond. She had learned that when people accuse language of being a shield, it's often because they fear what it reveals. The following week, the board convened again. This time, the agenda included a formal review of leadership roles. The language was careful. Phrases like transition planning and organizational stability were used, instead of anything more direct. Rachel attended on Monica's behalf. Monica listened via secure call, muted. Daniel spoke again, outlining concerns and recommendations. Others followed. No one raised their voice. No one pointed fingers. When the decision was announced, it was almost understated. Mark would step down from his executive role, effective at the end of the quarter. He would retain equity subject to revised terms. Operational leadership would shift to a committee structure until a replacement was identified. There was no gasp, no dramatic pause. Just acknowledgement. Monica ended the call and sat quietly for a moment, allowing the reality to settle. She did not feel relief. She felt completion. That evening, Mark came home early. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, his hands clasped tightly together. "They're pushing me out," he said. Monica met his gaze. They're correcting course? He laughed softly, a sound without humor. You don't even sound angry. I'm not, she replied. Then what are you? He asked. Monica considered the question. Resolved. Mark stared at her for a long moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You never wanted this company, he said. I wanted it to be honest, Monica replied. The days that followed were quieter. Mark spent long hours on the phone negotiating terms, speaking with advisors. Monica focused on her own work, preparing for the transition outlined in the settlement framework. She met with Rachel to review final documents, ensuring protections were in place. One afternoon, Rachel asked her, Do you want to address the board directly before this concludes? Monica thought about it. No, she said. They've heard what they need to hear. Rachel nodded. That's consistent. Consistency had become Monica's anchor. As Mark's departure became imminent, the office atmosphere shifted again, this time toward cautious relief. People spoke more openly. Meetings felt less tense. Decisions were made collaboratively rather than deferred upward. Monica observed the changes without comment. On Mark's final day in the office, there was no farewell gathering, no speeches. He packed his things quietly and left before noon. A brief internal message announced the transition and thanked him for his contributions. Monica read it without emotion. That evening, she stood alone in the apartment they had once shared as partners in ambition. Mark's belongings were already gone. The space felt lighter, though emptier too. She did not celebrate. She sat at the table where she had once balanced accounts and closed her notebook for the last time. The work that had consumed her attention for months, years, really was finished. What remained was not victory, but clarity. The investor who finally spoke had done more than acknowledge a moment. He had broken a pattern, and in doing so, he had allowed the system to correct itself without spectacle. Monica understood now that justice did not always arrive through confrontation. Sometimes it arrived through someone choosing finally to speak. And sometimes it arrived because someone else had chosen long before to keep records and remain still. The boardroom felt different when emotion was no longer invited. The chairs were the same. The table still bore the faint scratches of past meetings, the kind no one bothered to polish out. The screen at the front displayed the agenda in plain text black on white stripped of branding. There were no dramatic visuals today, no pitch decks designed to persuade. Only documents, only procedure. Monica took her seat quietly, Rachel Stein beside her. Across the table, the interim committee members settled in laptops, open notepads ready. The atmosphere was restrained, professional, almost austere. Mark arrived last. He nodded to the room without making eye contact and took his seat near the end, no longer at the head. The shift in position was subtle, but it carried weight. For the first time since the company's earliest days, he was not centered. The meeting began on time. Karen Liu outlined the purpose of the session to finalize governance adjustments and confirm the record. Her voice was even her language precise. She spoke of alignment, compliance, and fiduciary responsibility. The words carried no accusation, but they left little room for denial. Rachel presented first. She did not frame her remarks as argument. She framed them as sequence. She walked the board through the financial timeline, capital infusions, cash flow gaps, reliance points. Each slide contained dates, amounts, and references. No adjectives, no speculation. The bank records spoke for themselves. Monica watched the faces around the table as the pattern emerged clearly undeniable in its consistency. Heads nodded. Notes were taken. Questions were asked, but they were technical, not confrontational. Rachel moved on to the corporate documents. The cap table reflected assumptions, she said, not reality. She displayed excerpts from the operating agreement and early board minutes, highlighting language that obscured the source of funds. She explained how informal practices left uncorrected had evolved into misrepresentation, not necessarily by intent, but by neglect. Mark shifted in his seat. Rachel then addressed governance. Unilateral decision-making, she said, is not inherently improper. But when combined with inaccurate disclosures and a failure to correct the record, it creates exposure. She paused, allowing the implication to settle. The final section was brief. The incident, Rachel said, occurred in a professional setting in the presence of third parties. It was preserved through contemporaneous documentation and corroborated by indirect evidence. We are not here to litigate it. We are here to acknowledge it. The room remained silent. Karen Liu took over outlining the proposed resolutions, revised disclosures, permanent governance changes, leadership transition timelines, and internal acknowledgement of the incident within compliance records. No one objected. When discussion opened, the questions were few. One board member asked Mark if he wished to respond. Mark cleared his throat. He looked at the table, then at the faces around him, then finally at Monica. For a moment it seemed he might say something personal. Instead, he spoke carefully. "I didn't handle things the way I should have," he said. "I accept the board's decisions." The words were measured, rehearsed. They did not reach Monica emotionally, and she did not expect them to. Another board member asked Monica if she wished to add anything. She considered it briefly. "No," she said. The meeting concluded with votes recorded and action items assigned. The resolutions passed unanimously. As people gathered their things, the mood was subdued but resolved. There was no sense of triumph, no relief loud enough to echo. Only the quiet finality of decisions made. In the hallway, Mark lingered near the window, staring out at the city. Monica passed him without stopping. "Monica," he said quietly. She paused, turning toward him. "I never thought it would end like this," he said. She met his gaze. "It didn't end," she replied. "It changed." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing that distinction for the first time. That afternoon, Monica returned to her desk and began the work of transition. She organized files, delegated tasks, and prepared handover notes where appropriate. She did not overstay her role. She did not insert herself where she was no longer needed. Rachel checked in briefly. "You handled that well," she said. Monica inclined her head. It handled itself. The days that followed were marked by quiet efficiency. Emails went out confirming changes. Updated disclosures were filed. Investors acknowledged receipt. The company moved forward slower, perhaps, but steadier. Mark's presence diminished gradually. He attended fewer meetings. His authority narrowed to specific defined tasks. The transition plan moved forward without resistance. At home, the separation became logistical rather than emotional. Paperwork replaced arguments. Dates replaced conversations. Monica moved through it all with the same restraint she had shown in the boardroom. One evening, as she packed a box of documents she no longer needed, she found her old gray notebook, the one she had used in the early days. She flipped through its pages, seeing the careful columns, the neat handwriting, the notes she had made when everything felt precarious. She closed it and set it aside. The boardroom reckoning had come without shouting, without humiliation, without spectacle. It had come through structure. Monica understood now that this was the most durable form of justice. Not one that relied on outrage or exposure, but one that rested on alignment between truth and authority, between record and responsibility. As she turned off the lights in the office that evening, she felt neither victorious nor defeated. She felt complete. The settlement arrived without ceremony. It came as a draft, attached to an email with a neutral subject line, revised terms for review, and a timestamp that suggested it had been prepared carefully, then held until everyone agreed it was ready. Monica opened it at her desk, the office quiet around her, and read it slowly from beginning to end. The language was restrained. No admissions of guilt, no apologies, no attempt at moral framing. It addressed what the board had agreed to address: financial correction, governance, permanence, transition timelines, and non-retaliation. It acknowledged the incident in a single paragraph, phrased in compliance terms, careful and precise. It did not ask Monica to forgive. It did not ask her to forget. Rachel Stein joined her via video to walk through the document line by line. "This is designed to close doors," Rachel said, "not to open new ones." Monica nodded. Which doors? Public escalation. Relitigation, narrative battles. Rachel paused. It also closes the door on erasing what happened. They discussed each clause. Restitution aligned to the documented contributions, with interest calculated conservatively. Governance changes made permanent, not provisional. A clear separation between Mark's future activities and the company's leadership. Mutual non-disparagement, with explicit carve-outs for legal and compliance disclosures. A strict non-retaliation provision enforceable. Rachel stopped at one paragraph. "This is the line you'll be pressured to cross," she said. Monica read it again. A confidentiality clause broad enough to silence her beyond what was necessary. "I won't sign that," Monica said. Rachel nodded. "I expected that." They drafted a revision narrowing the clause, preserving Monica's right to speak in legal contexts, compliance reviews, and to personal counsel. No interviews, no press, no performance. Just the right to truth, where truth mattered. The counterproposal went out that afternoon. Mark reacted the next evening. He came home later than usual, the draft in his hand, his expression tight. "They're letting you keep everything," he said, the words edged with bitterness. Monica looked at him steadily. "They're correcting what exists. You're refusing the NDA," he continued. "Do you know what that does to me?" Monica considered the question. "It keeps the record intact," she said. Mark laughed softly. "You always knew where to draw the line?" She did not respond. The line had been drawn long before this, when she chose documentation over argument, restraint over reaction. Over the next few days, negotiations continued. Language tightened. Numbers settled. Timelines aligned. The draft became final. Rachel called when it was ready. "This is clean," she said. "It protects you without spectacle." Monica read the final version once more, then signed. The board executed the agreement the same day. Mark's response was muted. He did not argue. He did not plead. He seemed more than anything exhausted. The fight had drained from him, leaving a resignation that felt older than the conflict itself. "This is it, then," he said quietly one night, standing in the doorway of the room they no longer shared. "This is the boundary," Monica replied. He nodded, accepting the phrasing. Boundaries were easier to accept than judgments. The weeks that followed were transitional in the truest sense. Files were handed over, access was adjusted, calendars were cleared. Mark's presence in the company receded, replaced by interim leadership and committee oversight. There was no announcement beyond what compliance required. No farewell. No reckoning staged for others to witness. Monica continued to work through the end of the transition period, not because she needed to prove anything, but because continuity mattered. She completed what she had started. She left the systems she had built in a condition she could stand behind. Colleagues approached her quietly during those weeks. Not to congratulate her, to thank her, to ask questions about process, to say simply that things felt different now. She listened. She did not comment. At home, the separation unfolded with the same quiet efficiency. Paperwork replaced conversation. Dates replaced emotion. The apartment emptied slowly, objects leaving without ceremony. Monica packed what was hers and left the rest where it belonged. On her last day in the office, Monica arrived early. She walked through the space she had helped to keep alive, past desks. She had paid for systems, she had stabilized processes she had quietly enforced. She did not linger. She did not take photographs. She met briefly with the interim committee, answered final questions, and handed over access credentials. Rachel joined for the closing minutes, ensuring everything was aligned. As Monica stood to leave, Daniel Whitmore spoke once more. "I want to acknowledge something," he said, his tone careful. "This could have gone very differently." Monica inclined her head slightly. "It didn't," she said. "That's because of how you handled it," he replied. Monica paused, then answered honestly. "It's because the record existed." Outside, the day was bright and unremarkable. The city moved on. Monica walked a few blocks, then stopped at a cafe and ordered tea. She sat by the window and watched people pass, each absorbed in their own stories. She felt no triumph. What she felt was alignment, the sense that her actions and her values no longer conflicted. She had not humiliated Mark. She had not sought revenge. She had not demanded applause. She had refused to cross a line that would have traded truth for comfort. The settlement did not erase what happened. It did not restore what had been broken. It did something quieter and more durable. It set a boundary that would hold. When Monica finished her tea, she stood paid and stepped back into the street. There was nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to prove. Only the work of leaving well. Leaving did not feel like an ending. It felt like a release of pressure. Monica had carried so long, she no longer remembered when it began. On her final morning in the apartment, she woke before sunrise. The rooms were mostly empty now, their echoes softened by the absence of argument, of waiting, of unfinished conversations. She moved through them quietly, gathering the last of her things with the same care she had always applied to details that mattered. There was no farewell note left behind, no symbolic gesture. Monica locked the door and handed the keys to the building manager without comment. Outside, the air was cool and clear. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk, orienting herself, not to the city, but to herself. Then she walked away. The legal matters concluded exactly as Rachel Stein had predicted they would, without spectacle. The agreement was executed, filed, and archived. Governance changes were formalized. Corrected disclosures became part of the company's permanent record. Mark's transition was completed quietly, his name gradually receding from meeting agendas and internal communications. There were no public statements. There was no apology tour. The world did not pause to acknowledge what had happened. And Monica did not need it to. In the weeks that followed, she declined invitations that would have pulled her back into the narrative industry events, where questions would be asked, private meetings, where curiosity disguised itself as concern. She was polite, firm, and unavailable. She took time instead to do things that required no justification. She returned to routines she had abandoned during years of crisis management. Morning walks, unhurried meals, evenings without spreadsheets open on her lap. She slept more deeply than she had in years. Occasionally, she received updates from Rachel, administrative confirmations, final acknowledgments. Each one marked the closure of a loop, a quiet click of something locking into place. "You did well," Rachel said during their last call. Monica considered the phrasing. "I did carefully," she replied. Rachel smiled. "That's usually better." News of the company reached Monica only indirectly. A former colleague mentioned that meetings felt calmer now. Another said decision-making was slower but clearer. Someone else said they felt safer speaking up. Monica listened without comment. She did not feel ownership over the outcome. The company had moved beyond her, as it should have. What she had given it money structure restraint had done its work. Mark did not contact her again. She learned through mutual acquaintances that he was consulting, pitching new ideas, telling a revised version of his story. Monica did not correct it. She did not track it. The record already existed where it mattered. One afternoon, while sorting through old files, Monica came across the original folder she had created years ago, the first one labeled simply Initial Support. She opened it and scrolled through the earliest entries, small transfers, hopeful notes, reminders, written in a version of her handwriting that looked younger somehow. She closed the folder and archived it. That chapter no longer required active attention. What remained was not bitterness nor regret, but a clarity she carried easily now. She understood with a depth earned rather than taught how power functioned in quiet spaces, how silence could protect harm, but also preserve truth depending on who held the record. She had learned that justice did not always arrive with witnesses. Sometimes it arrived through process, through patience, through refusing to trade integrity for relief. And she had learned that leaving with dignity did not require proving anything to anyone else. On a clear morning, weeks later, Monica sat in a small park near her new apartment, a notebook resting unopened beside her. Children played nearby. A dog barked. Someone laughed too loudly at nothing in particular. The world continued. Monica watched it with a sense of calm she had not known before. She was not rebuilding. She was not recovering. She was simply living without distortion. Her strength had never been loud. It had never needed to be. It had been present in the choices she made when no one was watching, in the records she kept, in the lines she refused to cross even when crossing them would have been easier. She stood when she was ready and walked home. There was nothing left to say. What stays with us after a story like this is not the moment of violence, nor even the legal outcome. It is the quiet discipline that came before everything unraveled. Monica did not win because she was louder, smarter, or more aggressive. She did not win by humiliating anyone in return. She won because she respected reality when it was inconvenient, because she kept records when no one asked her to, and because she understood that truth does not need urgency to survive, only preservation. There is a lesson here that often gets overlooked. Strength does not always look like resistance. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like silence that is not empty, but intentional. Monica did not stay silent out of fear. She stayed silent long enough to make sure that when she spoke through documents, through procedure, through law, her voice could not be dismissed. Another truth emerges just as clearly. Systems do not correct themselves out of morality. They correct themselves when facts make denial impossible. Accountability is rarely born from outrage alone. It comes from alignment between actions and records, between behavior and consequence. And perhaps the hardest lesson of all is this: leaving with dignity does not mean you lost. It means you refuse to become someone you do not recognize just to feel justified. Monica walked away without applause, without revenge, without spectacle. And that is precisely why her ending carries weight. In a world that often rewards noise, this story reminds us that quiet integrity endures longer. That boundaries once set do not need defending forever. And that the most powerful thing you can sometimes do is document, wait, and let reality speak for itself. If this story resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment stayed with you the most? What lesson did you take from Monica's choices? Share your reflections in the comments. Your perspective matters here. And if you value stories about quiet strength, accountability, and justice that unfolds without spectacle, consider subscribing to the channel. Not for drama, but for truth that lingers long after the story ends.